Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another Question Time Live here at the Hoeg Law YouTube channel, Virtual Legality, whatever you want to call us. Thank you so much for dropping in this February Saturday morning when I know you could be playing Elden Ring, you could be playing Horizon Forbidden West, you could be playing a whole host of things, watching them, otherwise enjoying things outside of a YouTube stream with a lawyer in Michigan. But I am very, very happy that you are here. If you haven't been with us for a question time video before, these are Patreon sponsored. This is all a function of the wonderful patrons at the Hoeg Law YouTube channel. And at one of the tiers of the Patreon, they're allowed to ask questions, and I put them up in slides, and we do these various things in order to make sure that those questions are answered and highlighted. But in a first for this channel, there are no patron questions this month. Obviously, a lot going on in the world. Obviously, a lot of other things to pay attention to. But I do want to make sure that I give a thank you to all the patrons that otherwise work with this channel, help us survive, help us exist. Honestly, as I say in I think every one of my videos, I couldn't do it without viewers and listeners like the folks that help this channel, even with just subscriptions. Every little bit helps. The Patreon is strong. We actually set records basically every month, and I couldn't be more thankful for all of that. We've got 87 right now, and I'm just so appreciative. But as it stands today, we don't have any Patreon questions, which means this could be a very, very short question time this month, or for those of you that are following the stream, I am open for business. I can't answer legal questions, as I say in the various blog posts, and I think the description to this video itself, but I can answer just about anything else. So if you've got some questions in the chat, in the community, please do let me know. Otherwise, I'm probably just going to talk over some of the biggest things that we've done this month, some of the unusual aspects of that. If you want to catch my eye, I've got the chat up, just at Hoeg Law. Gives it a little orange sticker for me to see, or of course super chats, but please don't feel obligated to do that. Obviously, I appreciate the support, but nobody has to do that if they just want to chat with me, if they just want to ask a question. So I see Neil in chat here. I'm overdosing on Kirby and the Forgotten Land hype. Yeah, you know, I think I saw a mashup of Kirby wandering through the lands between in Elden Ring on my feed at some point in the last few days. I thought that was pretty amusing because they're both kind of dreamlike apocalyptic scenarios, but Kirby is even more amusing, fighting off the weird monsters that populate that Elden Ring world. So yeah, that game looks really, really good. My daughters are very pumped for it. They want Kirby to eat a car and drive around. They really enjoyed that preview from, I think it was the last Nintendo Direct. So that's one that we're very much looking forward to in Hoeg House. I will also say I'm very much looking forward to, personally, Triangle Strategy. I love that HD 2D thing that Square Enix is doing. I loved Octopath Traveler. I love strategy games as much as I love RPGs, and it just reeks of Final Fantasy Tactics. Oh my goodness. Emin Resu with a super chat of $20, and what I'm going to describe here as a cartoon of a lemon hugging a blueberry. Tell me how close I got to that. I am so appreciative. Thank you so much for your generosity and support of the channel. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I think it's definitely a lemon. There's definitely a lemon hugging another fruit, but I can't tell you what fruit that is. I'm not a fruit identifier. If you need that, probably you need another YouTube channel. Maybe there's a fruit identification YouTube channel. Who knows on these various things. But thank you so much, Emin Resu, for that super chat and support of the channel. Jenny's getting inky with it. I do love profile names. What did you think of Final Fantasy X and its sequel? Was thinking of replaying them? I like that question. I will tell you, Final Fantasy X seems beloved by a lot of folks in a lot of places. It's not on the higher end of my echelon list for Final Fantasy. It's very serious for a Final Fantasy, and maybe I just like mine a little bit soapier, a little bit more adventuresome. But Final Fantasy X left me sad the first time I played it. And I think that's its goal. It's kind of melancholic, but I didn't quite love the 3D graphics as much as I kind of liked Final Fantasy IX and 8 and 7, which obviously, if we're doing numbers at home, are the ones that immediately preceded Final Fantasy X. But I do like it. I don't know that there's a Final Fantasy I don't like, including 13 and 15, however you might feel about those. So I don't like it as much as some. Final Fantasy X2, or 10-2, I guess. That always sounded wrong to say. I don't know that I got very far in. It was very, very different, and so I don't know that I've ever gotten past the halfway point of that game. But certainly ones to look at, and some of the remasters there I think work really well. There are a lot of good places to play Final Fantasy nowadays, which is really, really awesome. If you didn't play Final Fantasy 13, or if it wasn't ruined for you in its entirety, the Xbox backwards compatibility gave it some frame rate upgrades, gave it some resolution upgrades. It is fantastic on that system if you're looking to play another Final Fantasy. The Pretzel 2 at Hoeg Law. How are you this morning? Which part of Michigan are you in, if you don't mind me asking? Not at all. I generally refer to where I live as Metro Detroit, and it's a little bit between Detroit and Ann Arbor, where my primary book of business and where I worked for a long period of time. That's where the University of Michigan is. That's where Michigan Law School is. That's where I went. And so it's about in between, and it was easy to get to Lansing as well, which is our capital and the seat of our government, which is also useful for lawyers from time to time. So I live in between those various areas. That's where Northville is. But I don't mind you asking at all. Michigan is gray skies, winter, snow on the ground. It's February, folks. It's not my favorite time of year, I got to be honest. But I do get some like bright, dramatic lighting on my face from the snow reflection. So thank you for asking. Let's see here. Neil, Kirby is definitely pretty easy and kid-friendly, but if you go for 100% like I do, then you get some real nice difficulty in those final challenges. Yeah, I think that's kind of what Nintendo does now, right? I like Mario Odyssey, but so much of it is so easy to do, and then there's just ridiculously hard things. So I think they go for, hey, you can see the stuff, you can clear the things if you just want to go straight through it. My daughters are going to be able to play that just like they can Odyssey, but then here's some stuff that's a little bit more challenging. I think that's a good approach for Nintendo. Gecko Gamer at Hoeg Law, did the war in Ukraine affect your business? Not as it stands, but I think it affects everyone in the world. I would expect changes in pricing. I would expect some stuff to happen there. Obviously, not the highest concern for something like that, but sanctions, economics, energy prices, all those things are going to be reflected and altered, I think, in the future. But thank you for the question. Let's see. Mike GT1110. Hey, Hoeg Law. First of all, thoughts on the Juwan Howard incident? Okay, so for those of you that don't know, Juwan Howard is my head basketball coach. I say I don't actually own the University of Michigan, but I did go there, and I have a strong affinity for it. And he finished a recent game by punching an assistant coach. And you can see on my Twitter that I was very upset about that. In fact, I probably would have thought strongly about firing him. I think it's very important for college coaches in particular that have this leadership role in the community to the teams that they represent to not do things like that. If I didn't fire him, I might have suspended him for an entire season, a year, to go think about those kinds of things, because that bothers me. That bothers me more than winning basketball games. He's a very good head coach. He was the AP National Coach of the Year last year. He did very well with the Michigan team. His team follows him, which is part of the problem. He punches this assistant coach, and then the Michigan team starts punching people at the same time. So I feel very strongly about, in those roles, being role models for what you want your university to be, what your university wants to be as a projection looking outward, and that I really, really, really didn't like. So you could see my tweets on that. I was quite animated about it when it happened, because I really love the University of Michigan, and it doesn't look good at all. But thank you for the question. Yeah, I really, really, really hated it. Big Boss at Hoeg Law, the termination of VTuber Ura Rushia from HoloLive is a reminder of the seriousness of NDAs. That's a tragic, confusing, and messing story. She's the #1 super chatted YouTuber in the world. Well, we could change that today. As I said, you're not obligated for super chats, but let's become #1. I'm kidding. I didn't know anything about this story. Certainly, when we talk about contracts and people come into the comments and say, well, is that enforceable or should I worry about that? There's essentially two things that you have to be concerned with. One is, in general, contracts are going to be enforceable regardless of how you feel about the terms. If you're going to get them not enforceable, you're going to have to go through a court process that declares some provision of them to be void. You're spending money on lawyers and time and resources already at that point, so take them seriously. But then, too, yeah, when you talk about NDAs, when they have these provisions in them, they can really be a problem when you violate them, even though a lot of the times companies maybe don't do that. There is a largesse window depending on who you're working with. That's part of the evaluatory process. So I'll look into that story. I don't know anything about it more than what you just described in that comment. But certainly it does seem like the kind of thing that people should be aware of. Michael Poplar at Hoeg Law. With acquisitions, when do you think Xbox will run into legitimate monopoly concerns? Well, as I've said in this space, I think a Federal Trade Commission or Department of Justice that wants to frame the market as something more specific than just gaming could start looking at subscription services and access to cloud architecture and things like that that give Microsoft a competitive edge and say, well, maybe you're moving in on kind of a monopoly position. Don't know. That said, I tend to think that this deal with Activision is going to go through, and I tend to think that you can get up to 25, 35% of a marketplace without ringing too many bells, without raising too many red flags. But certainly, we're looking at a Federal Trade Commission and a U.S. Department of Justice that is at least projecting that it intends to be more aggressive. So we'll see how that actually plays out. We're only in the first year of the Biden administration. The chairperson of the FTC was only recently consented to and appointed to that position. So there's still a ways to go to see exactly how aggressive they wound up being in practice. So who knows? We will certainly find out. Mike GT1110 again at Hoeg Law. Does any government other than the United States have the power to do anything to prevent the Activision Microsoft deal? I've never heard an explanation how they could cause problems. Yeah. Basically, Microsoft's a multinational entity that operates in almost every country in the world. So if the deal touches those countries at all, and Microsoft, I believe, has identified not specifically 17 jurisdictions where they need to go get approval or authorization, then any of those countries could try to cause trouble. Now, if you're not a bigger country, if you don't have a lot of contacts with Microsoft, if their revenue doesn't matter to you in that jurisdiction much, maybe you don't have as much leverage or power or desire to get in the way of a deal like this one. But generally speaking, Microsoft is going to have to go and get permission from everybody that requires them to get permission. And the time period through which the FTC and the DOJ is reviewing their documents has to expire in order for the deal to go through. So yeah, a lot of these folks can touch it. That's pretty normal course for a global company. So they've done this before and they will do it again. So they know those processes. The ones that I think are the most likely to cause problems, not that I think it's likely, again, I'm 80-20 on this deal, are the U.S. government entities and the European Union / United Kingdom entities. So keep your eyes on those. You will get approvals from the European side of things when they sign off. You won't get that same kind of backing from the United States. It'll simply go away. It'll simply stop if they decide not to block or look for a settlement or anything like that. Thanks for the question. Neil, at Hoeg Law, have you played Hollow Knight? Are you also waiting for Silksong like the rest of us? I have played Hollow Knight. Great game. Little grim for me. Little dark. I like my games a little bit happier, usually. But absolutely great game. And yeah, Silksong was announced, seems like eons ago, right? So when we look at this, I try to put things out of my mind if I don't have a date for them, because this kind of thing can happen. So I'm definitely waiting. I'm looking forward to it. But it'll drop when it drops for me. And I will definitely play it because I did enjoy the first one. At Hoeg Law, how would you tier the mainline Final Fantasy games? 4 and 6 are right at the top for me, those Super Nintendo games. 2 and 3 to us Americans, because they didn't trust us to understand that games get released in other jurisdictions. 4 and 6 probably together at the top. 7 right after that. 6 is one of my favorite games of all time. And 4 was really my introduction to that kind of storytelling in a video game. Perfected, I think, in 6. But 4 holds a special place in my heart. 7 was the game after 6, one of my favorite games of all time, so I waited for that for a long, long time. I had a pre-order slip from the local electronics boutique in my wallet for a year and a half, I think. So it was a very exciting period of time for somebody that likes JRPGs, the mid-90s. So I like those the best. What do I like after that? That's a good question. I like 13 more than most, especially the first one. I think that with a little bit more direction, maybe, Final Fantasy XIII could have been one of the best of all time. I really like the overall theme of being fated to do something or otherwise being trapped in that fate and fighting against it. I like that. And so I really like 13. 12, I think, is a little overrated. I think that because I just don't enjoy the middle of that game. A lot of walking up mountains for long periods of time. But I think they had a lot of good ideas I would have liked to see kind of broadened out. And then everybody loves 9. 9 to me felt like Square Enix was trying to capitalize on its prior successes with 4 and 6 and 1 and 2 and everything else. So it never really connected with me. I don't really think of it as real characters. I think of it as more like a commercial enterprise. And that's not fair to Final Fantasy IX. That's just how it's always lived in my head. But thank you for asking me about Final Fantasy games. If I had a Final Fantasy logo, I'd put it up. Unfortunately, I just have Patreon. But maybe I'll have a Final Fantasy logo ready for the next time if y'all keep asking me Final Fantasy questions. One of my favorite topics, by the way. So thank you very much. Drew Dwin? Hey, Hoeg Law. What Switch games are you looking forward to playing this year? Triangle Strategy, number 1 with a bullet. That's March 4th. As I said at the top of this one, I absolutely love the HD 2D graphics engine that Square has put together. I love Octopath Traveler more than others, I think. And I love Final Fantasy Tactics. I played the first chapter of the demo, and then I let it sit to Triangle Strategy. It looks like everything I want it to be. Cannot wait for that one. I'm very much looking forward to that. Other Switch games, just said Kirby looks really good. And my daughter runs around the house yelling Splatoon 3, which demands a call and response of Splatoon 3, said in my best kind of Michigan sporting event voice. So we've been doing that since it was announced, I don't know, a year and a half ago. So we yell Splatoon 3 around the house. So I know that one is very much being looked forward to. I have no idea when Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out. I'm looking forward to that one. Elden Ring kind of scratches that Breath of the Wild itch a little bit. But we could talk about that game as well. I'm having a little bit more trouble getting into it than I think the reviews and the games media in general had indicated might be my situation. Let's see here. Kagami Uchiha, do you think it's possible for Sony to make as much money as they are right now with a subscription model like Game Pass? Yes. I think that there's versions of these business models that can lead to equal or better revenue stream for these companies. I think that's jumping into the deep end of the pool, frankly. Sony knows it can make revenue selling $70 products, blockbuster titles with the marketing. It is essentially in the best position to do that for a certain segment of the gaming populace, and it's reluctant to give those things away for quote-unquote free. And I don't blame them. But I do think if Sony drags its feet on this, if Spartacus isn't what people actually want, and I think there's a possibility that that's the case, then short to medium term, Xbox is going to eat their lunch on some of this stuff because it just doesn't make sense. As much as I like Horizon Forbidden West, and I really, really like it. I did not like Horizon Zero Dawn all that much, something like a 7 out of 10 to me. I like Forbidden West vastly more because the world building is so much better, the storytelling is so much better, and that's really why I play those kinds of games. So I'm really, really thoroughly enjoying it. I bought it at $60, as you might expect, as we've talked about at length here in this space, but I really, really do love that game. I don't know whether Sony will be able to put some of its mainline AAA titles day one into whatever service they've put on, because the financial folks are going to look at it and say, I don't know how we justify that. Frankly, I've looked at Game Pass a lot and said, I don't know how they justify that. They've got internal metrics we can't see. Sorry, I was distracted by a super chat I'll get to in just a second. And so I think Game Pass still has to prove itself as workable over enough of a time frame. They've spent all this money. They have to go get it back. They've got all these publishers that they're putting directly into Game Pass. And so that math gets a little bit more attenuated. Are we making our money back? We'll see whether Microsoft holds fast to it. Certainly, they have given every indication that they intend to put the resources needed into that process. But questions are allowed. Gecko Gamer with a €5 super chat. Can you yell Splatoon 3? Okay, so, right. We'll do a little performative here. Yes, I apologize if this gets loud. I don't usually yell into this microphone, but essentially, my daughter would go Splatoon 3, and it would sound like that, and then I go Splatoon 3 when she does that, and we do it around the house. So she'll yell it from her bedroom even while I'm working, and I'll yell it. I'll yell it back to her. Kids, man. They're awesome. She is super pumped for Splatoon 3. The Nintendo Direct had the Splatoon 3 coverage of the PvE mode, and they didn't put a date on it. And she just fell on the floor and was just very, very sad because I had told her like a stupid, stupid father, oh, I think they're going to give us a date today. Yep. Didn't win any kudos for that one. But I hope you enjoyed that. That's what we do around Hoeg House. If you ever want to imagine what we are, what we sound like. Let's see. What else do we got here? RJH00, Hoeg Law, since the EU does approve these deals as opposed to the US, which just doesn't oppose them, does the EU have the power to come back later and say the deal was bad like the US is doing to Meta? Right, if you aren't familiar with it, Meta/Facebook is getting sued by the FTC to unwind the Instagram and WhatsApp purchases years after they actually were finalized. The answer to that, and this is always important, both as a lawyer and just in life, is the ability to say, I don't know. The EU would strike me as if you approve a deal, it's very difficult to go back on, but it's also possible that within the regulations or the laws of either one of the member states or the union itself, you could have something built in that says, but if circumstances change, if it becomes obvious that you are going to act in a monopoly fashion, et cetera, we still reserve the right to do something against you. That wouldn't surprise me in those governments. I'm not saying that that exists. But certainly when you approve of something, it becomes much harder to justify acting against it. Whereas in the United States, essentially the timer just ends. Well, the 30 days is up. We're not going to sue you and we're not going to demand that you not enter into the deal. So go ahead. And then if something happens later on, we'll look at it. That's obviously more troubling for United States businesses than actually getting an approval and being able to point to it if they ever turn around and say, look, you looked at this and you approved it. And then they'd have to argue we didn't know something, it's under a different law, et cetera, et cetera. Mike GT1110 at Hoeg Law, which professional Detroit sports team will win a title next? Man, if you're familiar with the Detroit sports scenes, you know all of our teams are terrible. Certainly not the Lions. Nobody would make any money betting on the Lions for that. I'd like to think the Red Wings. We got Steve Yzerman, one of the heroes of Red Wings history. I got a signed Steve Yzerman jersey in my basement. One of my favorite pieces of sports memorabilia. He's our GM. He just started in a real bad place with the Red Wings. Red Wings, probably my favorite team. So I think they're going to come back maybe another 5 years, though. Tigers also aren't god-awful. I don't know about the Pistons. So I'm going to go with the Red Wings. And that matches the rest of the questions from this video because the Red Wings, of course, big faction in Final Fantasy IV. So we're making it all work together. Thank you so much for the question. Let's see. BLT, I love the Final Fantasy XIII soundtrack. Isn't it great? I have the soundtrack CDs. I used to play them when I had to commute to work, before work was wherever my laptop was. And I always thought they were really, really stand out. Now, I tend to like the orchestral stuff from Uematsu the best out of the Final Fantasy stuff, but what they have done with the new folks and having almost a pop element and some other things in those games, I really think is impressive because you're not going to be able to copy what Uematsu was doing for you in those older games. Neil at Hoeg Law, given the recent Nintendo announcement, are there any 3DS or Wii U games that you've picked up or are going to make sure you get? That's a really good question. I don't think so. I think I basically went through as those systems evolved and got what I wanted to get at the time. But now that you mention it, might do a look because, hey, what does it hurt? So I'll take that as a maybe. I have to find my 3DS, to be honest. These are why these things close down. I don't know where my 3DS is exactly. One of my daughters might have it. And I haven't plugged in my Wii U since the Switch came out. So that's just me being honest. But certainly it is a shame that some of those games will be going away. And so maybe I will take a look. Let's see. If I get this wrong, I apologize. Julio Arauz at Hoeg Law, what video game genre do you tend to stick to? I am every game genre in terms of what I play. I'm playing right now Elden Ring. I'm playing Horizon Forbidden West. I'm playing a Voice of Cards game. You might have heard me talk about last year if you've been in this space for a while. Voice of Cards is kind of an experimental Square Enix game where the entire world is built out of cards, and it's a very straightforward RPG. The original Voice of Cards game was called The Dragon Roars. These are like $30, I think. And then they just dropped out of nowhere a second Voice of Cards game called, I want to say, The Forsaken Maiden, which I've actually been playing at the same time as I've been playing Horizon and now Elden Ring. because it's just a different change of pace. So I play everything. The only thing I've kind of dropped over the last few years is sports games, just because it takes a lot of time to actually get involved in. And it's always ended for me at some point where I say, why am I doing this? I should be playing something else. But other than that, I play first-person shooters, third-person adventures, role-playing games of both the Western and Japanese make. And my favorite genre, if you can't tell, is role-playing games, and then in general, Japanese role-playing games, Final Fantasy being my favorite series. But yeah, I pretty much pride myself on trying to play everything that's worth playing. And to be honest with you, I am not the biggest Souls fan, and so Elden Ring is interesting to start out with. So thank you very much for the question. Let's see what else we got here. Again, flag it with @Hoeg Law if you want to make sure I see it, because I do skip through some of the ones that don't have that. Ever watched Eurovision? If no, what is your perception of it? I don't even know what it is. So give me a clarifying question there. Is that a TV channel? Is that a specific movie, etc.? But I will answer that if you follow up. I never, so this is someone that comments here a lot. I don't know that I've ever tried to pronounce it. Bad as a hog? Should be bad as a Hoeg, right? No? Hi, Hoeg Law. What's your relationship with Richard Law? Are we going to see you there more often? Yeah, so I have been on there quite extensively. Nick coordinates to have people come on and visit him. I try not to just bring my ignorance into the various trials that he covers halfway through, because I am not following those. I'm otherwise doing the law firm thing or acting here in virtual legality. So I try to pop on if it's not something that is halfway through. But Nick has done a lot of those streams that are very elongated, very useful, I think, covering trials of interest for people. So yes, you'll see me on there. You might see me on there pretty soon. But essentially, he extends an invitation to everybody that works with him, what is colloquially called LawTube, almost every morning. So it's just a matter of popping in when I can make it work, either in my schedule and if I think I have something to offer, because I'd never like to waste people's time. I like to provide value whenever I'm talking to folks, and so I do try to be careful with that, right? But yeah, so my relationship is we work together. He invited me on during the Rittenhouse trial. And so, yeah, I expect that I'll probably be on a couple more times. He's invited me to talk to him about games and some of the games issues that we've seen. Some of the other folks there, including Ian, really likes games as well. Tried to have Legal Mindset on here. Didn't work out. He lost power in South Korea for the entirety of the time that we would have been on, but I'm going to try to bring on a few more guests from LawTube, and you'll see me on Legal Bites quite often because Alita asks me on there a lot. And I do try to include those. If you guys don't know, I have a playlist called Hoeg Law Crossovers and References, because people do call out Hoeg Law a bunch. You can check out various of those in the playlist on the channel, which hopefully will just pop up here. Let's see if I actually can do that. I don't have to just talk about it. Yeah, so Hoeg Law Crossovers and References. If you've been watching the videos for a couple weeks, I have pitched that I'm on the Seasoned Gaming Bitcast, where we're talking from a very analytical perspective about games, more specifically than business and law. So if you're interested in that, you can see I'm on there a lot. This video was with Destin at IGN. Bellular News was covering what we were talking about with respect to Horizon. This is a Joe Rogan video with respect to the Legal Bites channel. For the most part, I go on those channels to talk about things that are slightly different in bent from what we talk about in virtual legality. So do check out this playlist. I think we have like 300 some odd videos over here now, and more to come. And if you spot anything that isn't on this playlist, you think it should be, let me know, because I have to remember to go and put them on the playlist itself from another person's channel. And to be frank, I forget that all the time. Let's see. Full House Gaming. You think you'll pick up Gran Turismo 7 too when it releases, Hoeg Law? See, Gran Turismo 2 was the one that I had to sell when I worked at Electronics Boutique, in case you didn't know this. And I remember those almost like a little PTSD. It was the Christmas season and people wanted Gran Turismo 2 and I didn't have any to give them, and I got yelled at a lot. That'll get you going in the morning. That was an interesting job. Yes, I mean, I think I've gotten all the Gran Turismo 7s. Frankly, I've kind of shifted over to enjoying Forza and Forza Horizon more. So I might wait for reviews and see what, if anything, it offers that is different. But I'm not the guy that has a steering wheel and pedals and those kinds of things to play those games. So maybe, probably I will get it. But we'll see how that looks. Mike GT1110 at Hoeg Law. Which Bethesda RPG are you most excited for? Fallout, Starfield, or Elder Scrolls? Well, as I mentioned, my hype cycle basically tries to put things in order of their actual release. So out of that, it's Starfield, because they've told us it's coming out in November. I'm not sure if I actually believe them on that date, but certainly it's the first in line. So I'm also very interested to see what the heck this thing looks like. I've joked on social media about the fact that I don't know whether Microsoft thinks it has a surefire winner and it doesn't need to show it off at all, or whether it's trying to hide the ball a little bit. I hope that it's more of the former, but they just continue to put out concept art. Nobody has realistically seen anything about how this game plays. We're all making assumptions on it. But we know it's been in the hopper for a long time. We know that Bethesda has obviously hit home runs before with things like Skyrim and Fallout 3 in particular, at least as I think about it. So Starfield, hopefully awesome, but I'm waiting to see that a little bit more before I get excited about any of them. Gecko Gamer at Hoeg Law. It is a yearly song competition that has most of Europe competing for the best song based on a jury and the audience watching it via TV. Oh, okay. So they're original songs. I have not seen it, but that sounds pretty cool. Back in the day, the earlier days of the show, my wife and I used to watch a lot of American Idol. This sounds different. This sounds a little bit more like a songwriting competition. But sounds very interesting. I have no impression of it because I didn't know what it was or that it existed. So I apologize for that answer. But it sounds interesting. Ross Wolf at Hoeg Law. Do you prefer remasters of old games or remakes / reimaginings? I think I prefer... those titles are difficult. So... I don't get very excited about a pure remaster that just does a few little things. So like Chrono Cross has a remaster coming out. It's not my favorite Square Enix game anyway, but it doesn't do a lot for me. It just looks like I remember it looking, and it's not very impressive. I do like a remaster that brings tech into the 21st century. Like, for instance, I really enjoy I don't know what they're called, the pixel perfect versions of the Final Fantasy games that we have gotten up until now. Those are clearly different graphics, but informed by what the original games were, not changing the way that the games actually play. I really, really like those kinds of things. I would love to see that HD 2D Octopath Traveler engine used for more of those Super Nintendo games from the Square Enix era. I would die if I got a Final Fantasy VI in that Octopath Traveler style. I hope that that's being worked on in the background because it's too obvious of a fit. But I do like those kinds of remasters that don't fundamentally change things. Remakes, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, wildly different game with kind of the same or similar plot elements, and I won't spoil anything more for folks that haven't played that yet, but that's always a big risk. I adored Final Fantasy VII Remake with some important caveats, but I think that they did a fantastic job, but it's no guarantee for those kinds of things. So I think I really like a remaster that goes a little bit further than just simply, making the resolution higher, but a remake, reimagining can be awesome. It just takes a lot more effort for those companies, I think. Thank you for the question. Neil, at Hoeg Law, it was announced that the prequel mobile game Octopath Traveler Champions of the Continent is finally getting a Western release this year and with beta test on Google Play. Thoughts? I didn't know that. I actually didn't know that existed until you just told me. I will have to see whether it's available to me. I don't play a ton on my phone. And truthfully, I don't play a ton on my PC, even though it's gaming ready. Because, I'll just be honest with you, my phone and my PC remind me of work, remind me of doing things that I do throughout my day, and for the most part, I like to separate that a little bit for when I play games. So I have a different space that I play my console games, on a TV, on a couch, and so I'll have to look at it. I'm just not spending a lot of time mobile gaming, especially since I'm not going anywhere or waiting in any lines very much in the last couple of years. But I will keep my eyes on that. I didn't know it existed. Really enjoy Octopath Traveler. VG at Hoeg Law, what determines that trial has verdict ruled by a judge, and what determines it's a jury trial? If the judge can produce a fair verdict and knows law better than the jury, shouldn't they always rule? Well, you probably have seen in the lawsuits that I have covered whether or not the party wants to request a jury trial. So for the most part, in most jurisdictions, and I know lawyers always talk like this, but there are caveats to basically every rule, you can go and you can ask for a jury of your peers to decide something. And then if both parties waive that, again, in most jurisdictions, and I know enough to be dangerous on various rules of civil procedure on this stuff, again, not a litigator, then you can have a judge determine both law and fact. So even in a jury trial, the jury is ostensibly only deciding on the facts of the case, what actually happened. And then there are, as part of that process, deciding based on the rules, the jury instructions that are given to them, how the law looks at that, but that the judge can step in as the final decider of law to do various things regarding what the jury found. We actually just saw this with the Sarah Palin New York Times case, where the judge in that case announced while the jury was deliberating, and this is not the way you should do things, that he was going to find that the case didn't satisfy the requirements under the law regardless of what the jury found. Now, as it turns out, at least was reported, some of the jury members heard that became a whole mess. But that the judge can have what's called a directed verdict that says, well, now that I look at what the two sides actually presented, the jury can't find that there is a problem here, and so I can actually direct the verdict. Always a potential for an appeal when you do that kind of thing. But ultimately, it's up to the parties. And when you're thinking about this in terms of strategy, if you've got a very sympathetic position, if you're suing a large corporation that most people think of as evil, let's say you were an individual suing Activision today right now, you might ask for a jury trial because you think that some of the aspects of a trial are going to be influenced by psychology and emotion, and a jury is more susceptible to that, more likely to side with you in those cases than a judge might be. Now, that's a little bit realpolitik. I hate to bring this all to you when we're talking about justice and trials, but that's also why you often see a jury trial waiver when you're looking at a terms and conditions or a big company, because they don't want to have that fight. Tends to be potentially more expensive, but also they're the big giant gorilla, and so all of those things go against them. And so you waive your right to a jury trial, and a judge would look at it, or you'd arbitrate, or those kinds of things when you look at those kinds of documents, right? So that's why it's up to the parties. I know that's not a terribly fulfilling reason, but that is the truth of the matter. We do have another super chat. Che with a $5 super chat. Thank you so much. Final Fantasy XIV is getting a graphics upgrade, can be played mostly single player with NPCs, and they said no to NFTs. I like Final Fantasy XIV. I had to put it aside when I couldn't get into it for like 2 months, like literally, in terms of having enough time to wait in the login line. But I very much enjoy Final Fantasy XIV. I think it's a little bit slow to really get moving in the parts that were from kind of the original Realm Reborn. But it's a very, very good game that I have enjoyed in the past. I would prefer to not continually pay a subscription fee for a game. If they would sell it to me in some fashion, I would like that. But it's highly recommended, very much enjoyed. So thank you very much for the super chat. Now, where did I leave off here? RJH00 at Hoeg Law. Eurovision Song Festival is a singing competition. Each country sends one singer. Singing isn't really the most important skill. Entertainment is. It's not limited to just EU countries. All right, so I'm going to have to check this out. This sounds wild. So I appreciate the recommendations as it turned out, because I don't otherwise have a feeling on any of this stuff. I'll give it a look-see. Gaston Colazo. Hey, Hoeg, do you prefer JRPGs or Western RPGs? I prefer JRPGs. I tend to think that open worlds in general and Western RPGs have pacing issues and have issues with the mainline plot because of that. Right? I love Skyrim. I love being able to go into bookshelves and look at books and go on little side quests, and I think it's fantastic. But as a main story, not terribly compelling. I think JRPGs, yes, more linear controlling of what it is that you're doing, can give better, stronger story elements than the Western RPG approach. There are mixes. I think Witcher 3 is effectively a mix between a JRPG with a set character and a strong through line in terms of plot, very strong storytelling, and a Western RPG where you can do a lot of other things because it's an open world and the side quests don't actually necessarily impact the main plot line. It's why Witcher 3 is, depending on the day, one of my favorite games of all time. But JRPGs, generally speaking, I think when you can focus that story, you're going to get better, more emotional, and more intense impact. So I tend to go for that. Thank you for the question. Christopher Morgan at Hoeg Law. How do you balance your day-to-day business at Hoeg Law and your YouTube and your Patreon? Poorly some days. In general, I would say the law firm, the clients, which I have a fiduciary obligation to, I'm licensed to practice law, they come first. So if somebody has an emergency or I'm doing something for a given client, I'm working on that as a priority. Then I'm trying to squeeze in videos every day, and then I'm trying to keep track of what the Patreon needs, and certainly try to continue to get the support for the channel that helps make that work. Because as people have asked me about money and things, the channel was never intended to be what it has become, which is something that takes up a significant amount of my time, and is very clearly not the best way, as it stands right now here in February 2022, to feed the family or keep the lights on, right? So in an effort to not seem like I'm selfishly not focusing on business development or client retention or these various things to make the firm run better, I really do need the support to help make everything work and kind of have the ends justify the means, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of time on a given day, it's kind of prioritized that way. But if like a news item hits and I just think it has to be covered, I've dragged myself out of whatever I'm doing to go do a video and do the research. And, you know, you think about when the Epic versus Apple verdict comes in, I wasn't ready for that at all. And I think I was doing it at 11 p.m. at night with 3 hours of highlighting and reading the however long the actual verdict was to bring that video as fast as I possibly could. So I love doing that stuff, and I'm not ever going to complain about it because, heck, I decided to do this on my own. But certainly it can be trying some days. And so I definitely appreciate you all in the chat. I definitely appreciate everybody that supports the channel because it's a little bit tricky. But we get everything done. Clients do come first. I have to say that. That's just the truth of the matter. But I really, really love sharing this information. We might have some interesting new announcements coming up pretty soon. So thank you very much for that question. Gecko Gamer at Hoeg Law, did you order the Steam Deck? I don't know. Ask Valve. I have no idea. No. I do have a deposit, the $5 from way back when. But I could not be more frustrated with Valve essentially saying, we'll send you an email at some indeterminate time in the future, at which point you'll have 72 hours to confirm that you do, in fact, want to purchase this thing that you very much tried to purchase, deposit, reserve when we actually announced it. I would be so appreciative. Valve, if you're watching this, if you're one of the 63 people watching this stream right now, please just let me pay for the thing. And then you can send it whenever. I'm okay with you getting the 2 or 3 extra months of interest. Just let me pay for the thing. But alas, I don't know whether I'll actually get one because I do get a lot of emails, and it's so easy to miss something like that or to have it filtered and not notice it for 3 days that I'm hopeful that I notice it when it comes in, but I don't have any guarantees that I will. Bad as a hog at Hoeg Law, to date, 250,000 people have signed the petition to allow refunds for Battlefield 2042 on all platforms. How big does it need to get before the SEC takes notice? The SEC? The SEC isn't going to take notice. The SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're in charge of keeping track of stock sales and things like that. SEC is not likely to get involved in any of this. Maybe the FTC? FTC would be in charge of things like false advertising, false claims. If that's what it's about here, maybe them. But the real answer is that those petitions don't matter to those groups so much. That doesn't mean you don't sign them. That doesn't mean you can't get involved in those kinds of things because the people's voice does matter, and it does matter to Electronic Arts. But as far as government entities, I would doubt very strongly that they're going to move on this really at all. But hey, stranger things have happened. So certainly I am watching that from afar. I didn't buy Battlefield 2042. It was a possibility. I think it was on my list of virtual legality possibilities in the past. Maybe I will follow up on that if there's more to talk about with respect to that story. Certainly, I think it's an interesting one. But I don't think the government agencies are likely to move. It's going to be pressure on Electronic Arts if it's going to succeed at all. Mike GT1110, Hoeg Law, not sure if you want to touch this one. Do you think Crumbly parents were appropriately charged? I don't know that one. I'm sorry. So I can't answer that question, but I just haven't been following that case. So I apologize there. Let's see here. Scrolling down a little bit more. You guys have been great, by the way. I was worried we wouldn't have anything to talk about here. But this has been fantastic. This has been an unusual one. Maybe I should schedule a community-only question time at some point. So we can talk about all sorts of things that I have to answer with, I don't know. But that's a lot of fun in and of itself. Z-Naker Finn at Hoeg Law, American Haas F1 team also feels this world situation. Absolutely. They hid logos and colors of their Russian sponsor, Uralkali. Uralkali key shareholder is the father of Haas F1 driver Nikita Mazepin. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, we have more conflicts and wars in the world than we really should, of all stripes. But this one seems a little bit different. It's an unprovoked attack on a democratic, independent country. And so I think a lot of the world is reacting to it in very strong ways, and I think justifiably so. There are a number of good threads on social media and the like about video game companies either operating in Ukraine or nearby. Certainly, we get a lot of games from Poland, and those are impacted. It's on the Ukrainian border. And so I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing for people to pay attention to this kind of stuff. And so I appreciate the updates on what folks are doing. Somebody came into my comments the other day. I think it was to this video or this video, one of these, that was talking about, hey, I'm just not interested in a video from your channel on this stuff today. It was the day of the invasion. And I said, hey, I totally understand. I totally hear you. I, however, am not a foreign policy expert. I'm not someone that can just go and talk you through these various things. And I'm not terribly good at doing a video that talks about these things, I think, at length. What I am good at is talking about law and business and video games and pop culture. So what I told this person in the comments, and I think it was taken well, it's certainly my intent, is I totally hear you on those kinds of things. I have my areas of expertise. This is what I'm good at. I'm going to keep making this stuff regardless. If folks want to have a change of pace, they want to talk about something different, they want to hear about something different. So I hope anybody in this channel or elsewise doesn't take that as somehow not paying attention to the world scene, not looking at those various kinds of things. I'm just not, in my opinion, the best person to reflect on those topics. I don't know enough about the specifics of the situation. I feel for, obviously, any democratic country that's being invaded. And so I think that's about as far as I can go with those. So you'll still get these kinds of videos from me because that's what I do. But if you don't want to watch them, if you don't think that it's where your headspace is at, I totally understand that. And please don't feel obligated to watch a Virtual Legality episode if you're just not that into it, either that day or during this time. But thank you for the update on that. I do think that kind of stuff is important. And another super chat that's very generous. I really appreciate it. From Yikes, $10. If you make a game and the environment is a digital replica of a real-world city, excluding business logos, do you need permission, maybe from the city itself? Depends. Go check out a video that I did about, I think it was the Chrysler building that was pulled out of the Spider-Man game, and how those kinds of things work together. So in general, like if you're out on the streets of New York or any other city, you have certain rights to just kind of film and look at the way the world actually is, right? It would suck if some kind of copyright could be taken and used against you for just observing the way the world actually operates. And that includes kind of incidental use of music, if something's playing in the store window when you walk by, all these various things. But in a video game, because you actually have to make it, you actually have to build it, I will be honest, the law doesn't have a lot of great precedent for covering those kinds of things. And if you have a trademark or a copyright or something else in the silhouette of your building or how it looks, you can cause trouble. And I don't know that any of that has been litigated to the maximal extent where you actually get a decision that's important on these kinds of questions. But you send the letter when you're upset about it and you own the rights to the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building or what have you. And then, generally speaking, Sony or Insomniac or somebody else is going to look at it and say, well, it's probably not worth it. Nobody's going to buy this game because that's in there and we don't want to fight with these people. And so they're pulled out. So do you need permission? Question mark, question mark, question mark. If they decide to say, hey, you definitely don't have permission, well, then chances are you're going to listen unless you think it's really, really important to the story that you are trying to tell. Thank you very much for the super chat question. Let's see here. Dell at Hoeg Law, Eurovision has major LGBT vibes. So if you question your sexuality but love your wife, consider skipping. I really want to check this out. These are great pushes for this show. So I'm going to have to pop in and see if I can find a clip or something on YouTube. Yeah, it's good stuff. Ross Wolf at Hoeg Law, what's your take on video games archival versus games tied to servers and being impossible to archive once they shut down? Should corporations be obligated to allow fans to maintain personal servers? I don't think so. That's kind of an interesting framing of that question. Are they obligated to allow? In other words, are they prohibited from enforcing against? Because I think we always have to be worried about obligations. We talk about this at some length in these various spaces about like right to repair laws. I don't generally want to see companies, individuals, or otherwise made to do something that takes their time or their resources by the government or by law. Different jurisdictions are going to vary on that. This is a reasonable minds can differ kind of position. But in your question, should they be prohibited from kind of suing? I think the Copyright Act should be reformed to cover our digital reality in some form or fashion. And I don't go too far down that road because effectively we're going to be living with whatever the legislature decides, and I'll evaluate those when they happen or are proposed. But there are definitely areas that we should look at and say, well, if there's a kind of orphaned intellectual property. I go back to No One Lives Forever because I want that game back. I want it remastered, and I can't have it. You can read articles about exactly why the various companies have lost track of who owns the intellectual property, but you could have something like a clearinghouse that says, let's sort that out. That's slightly different than what you're talking about with respect to archival. But in respect of archival, I would say, hey, yes, we should look at a different time period for copyrights in the digital age where they don't last as long, they aren't as valuable as long, and maybe we could have some kind of time frame that would allow people to otherwise archive those copies. There are occasionally pullbacks of the copyright laws that we see for libraries and museums and things like that, but I would love to see that readdressed for purposes of keeping these things safe. Companies, in my opinion, should be doing it anyway, and I would love to see more public pressure on them to do that, to have a vault in a mountain somewhere that says, hey, this is an escrow. If we go under, if we don't use it for 10 years, whatever it might be, then they'll automatically come out to the people. I would love to see something like that as a norm rather than a legal obligation. But we're far away from that. And to be honest with you, I'm just not sure that while we talk about it here, the market cares all that much. And if the market doesn't care, I just don't see the companies necessarily doing it on their own. So we're in a weird interregnum period. I don't want the Copyright Act to force additional obligations that go along with creating things. I want creating to be as friction-free as possible. But certainly we're in an unfortunate position with things like the 3DS and the Wii. And so I totally hear you, but it's going to take a change in opening up the law to even get to a place like that before we can force that on the companies. So thank you for the questions. Let's see here. We're going to be wrapping up pretty soon. So if you got your questions or your super chats or anything else, please consider putting them in now. Gecko Gamer, not Gecko Law, at Hoeg Law, architecture, IP law sounds like a hell. There are various areas of IP law that sound like a hell. See, I know enough. I deal in software contracts, technology contracts, and things like that, which is very IP focused. You have to be able to read the licenses and know what's going in which various places. But architecture and music, man, music is crazy. I would not want to be a music IP lawyer because you just have all these concurrent, simultaneous licenses. You have compulsory licenses that you can go and get through statutory rules, et cetera, et cetera. That music is crazy. If you want to see exactly why games get pulled down or music changes, it's because those licenses are damn near impossible. And I respect any lawyer that's doing them. At Hoeg Law, the Halo composer sued Xbox over the Halo series. Is he in his rights to do so? I got a video on that. You can check out Tarnished Halo. Is Microsoft using Halo music illegally? Where I talk about that, and I'm trying to get Marty O'Donnell to come on the site, but he may not be willing to do so during a legal complaint. But if I can, I'm going to have him talk directly to you about all of this on certain other stuff with respect to some other videos that we did about him. And his compositions for, in that case, Destiny and Music of the Spheres. But do check out that video. Is he in his rights? Like so many things, we can only evaluate from the third-party perspective. He's certainly got a complaint that would suggest that he's got a license that thinks that makes that all work. Microsoft appears to disagree, but certainly I evaluate it in that 40-minute video if you're looking to do something for 40 minutes today or some other day. Check that one out. At Hoeg Law, have you ever played Z-Mud? Like I think in college, like that's the old mud game, I think. Maybe. You're testing my my history with these kinds of things, but I don't remember it if I did either way. Neil at Hoeg Law, I've put it off long enough, but the weeb in me has to ask, do you watch anime? I have watched anime. I watched Neon Genesis Evangelion. I watched Macross. When I was a kid, I watched Macron 1. I don't know that any of you have seen that one. But I'm not generally seeking out anime for the most part. Would you call Arcane anime? I enjoyed that on Netflix. I don't know whether that one counts. But for the most part, I'm not watching a ton of animated stuff. It's not like a deal breaker. I will check it out if it's big, like Arcane was, and I'm happy that I did. But I'm not often checking out anime on its own. So apologies there. And then someone just called me a boomer, which is totally fair, except that I'm decades after the baby boom, so that's fine too. Bad as a hog, $5 super chat. Thank you so much. I already asked all my questions. Thank you for answering. Well, you didn't have to do that. That is very nice of you. Okay, so we got 5 minutes left. I think I've answered everything in this chat. I don't know that anybody has added anything to it. So thank you so much for coming to Question Time. Do check out that Patreon if you're interested. Thank you so much for participating in this chat. This was a smaller version of Question Time. Certainly a lot going on in the world. A lot of people playing Elden Ring. Do check it out. Not sure on it. I will definitely be talking about Elden Ring on the Bitcast tomorrow, so you can check that out as well. That's at 11 a.m. on Sundays. We generally go for a couple hours, so pop in there, see what I have to say about Elden Ring. I know a number of folks on that particular podcast very, very enthusiastic about that game. Otherwise, have a great Saturday, and I will catch you in the next episode of Virtual Legality. Thanks so much, everybody.